Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Lessons of Vietnam show. Tonight we're going to start a new several part series, but appreciate y'all coming on tonight. And I know you're getting tired of hanging around the house and looking for things to do and so forth, but we're coming to, I think we're coming to the end of this stuff. We just had a very important holiday. I hope you observed it. We talked about Happy Veterans Day, and you can't really say Happy Memorial Day because Memorial Day is the day we recognize those who died fighting for our country. So I did a consensus from other veterans and so forth, and we all came up with basically have a blessed day. And we decided that was a much more appropriate than have a happy Memorial Day. So I hope you had a blessed Memorial Day and enjoyed whatever that you did with your family, and that you took a few moments to commemorate the day and remember what it was all about and so forth, other than a long Monday. Tonight's show, the Lessons of Vietnam show, we're going, as it says here, telling the story of the Vietnam War and the men and women who served in the United States military, dispelling the myths and half-truths. I am your host, Bill Dixon, Vietnam veteran. I was there 67, 68. We're broadcasting the world headquarters of broadcast courtesy of Nissan Communications. Without them, we wouldn't have this show. They give us the time and the knowledge and so forth to do this show. If you have any comments, suggestions, or want to be a guest, just contact me at dixonbill80@yahoo.com. You can participate in the show during the show. Just dial 919-518-9773, or even better, come on to Computers 2K Voice. That way you can come on. If you have something that you'd like to say during the show, just come on and Amnon will put you on the air, and we'll hear about what you got to say. Next slide, please. There we go. During this period of time, there's a lot of stress. People being home together more than normal, feeling like you can't get out and do things. You're scared. There's a lot of out there, a lot of veterans out there in crisis. And if you're a veteran, know a veteran, or a family of a veteran, and you feel like there's a need, please call the 1-800-273-8255 number, or the text number, and talk to someone. There's someone there, a veteran there to talk to you and help you get through this period of time. So just remember that as you go out there. All right, thank you. All right, now the show is going to be a little different tonight, and probably the next couple of shows. I've always tried to show you or tell you the truth that best I could find out the truth with other veterans and so forth. Tonight's show, I'd be honest with you, I don't know the truth. We're going to be talking about a very controversial figure of the Vietnam War. We're going to discuss the good parts, his parts, and other people's parts. As it says here, the Vietnam War is a war of controversy from beginning to end, a time of political, public and political changes. We were going through women's rights, burn the bras, make love, not war, everything going on, sometimes painful confrontations and beliefs in American life, and war fought on television. It was the first war that had been on television where you could have dinner and watch the body bags come out. The public only seeing sound bites, though, of what someone has decided they should see. Sometimes decided based on the ratings for advertisement sales. The news became a business with talking heads and financial concerns and sometimes agendas. Up until that time, I don't think the news was anything more than news. And after, I think during the Vietnam War, it became a little bit more of a how we can get the best ratings and so forth. The Vietnam War and the home front was and still fraught with misinformation, mistaken information, and outright lies. With the advent of the internet, it is even harder to sort out the real truths. What is published on the internet is always on the internet, whether it is truth, fiction, or blending of both. And sometimes it's hard to figure out which one is the right one. As new information is acquired, it is placed beside that of the old information. How is one to know which one or neither is the real truth? Many of the myths of the war and those who were involved have been discredited, but the myths are printed right by the retractions to be discovered at the same time and be selected depending on a preconceived opinion. As you see, one of the ones out there is how every single discussion on sexism, any woman type stuff on the internet in real life has ever happened and will happen always forever until the earth finally falls into the sun, until the patriarchy is dismantled. There you can see somebody whitewashing the truth about Vietnam on the wall. There's a lot of that been going on. The facts don't always appear in some people's mind or agendas. They choose to believe what they want the truth to be, not what it is. Can't all have our own truths. We have our own beliefs and we have our own dispositions as far as what's the truth, but the truth is the truth. Okay. The Lessons of Vietnam school curriculum founded by Bob Matthews and North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated was put together to help dispel the many myths of the American involved in the Vietnam War. This online show is a continuation of that effort. Bob and I started the show with the assistance from Amnon Nissan's broadcasting facilities. No salaries or budget, just a desire for the truth to be told. Bob has retired and moved back to home out of state, leaving Amnon and myself to continue the mission. All of this being said, the Lessons of Vietnam show strives to always give you the real story and invite any corrections by our audience. As I say with each show, if there's anything that you see or hear on any of our shows that you do not think is the right information, please reach out to me, DixonBill80@yahoo.com, and let me know, and let's see if we can get it straightened out, because there's enough misinformation out there without creating some more. But this episode will be a lot different, as I mentioned, mainly because I'm not sure if anyone knows the real truth as related to our subject, or if the real truth will ever be known. Life is not a black and white story. There's a lot of gray, and nobody can really stand up to total scrutiny of their thoughts and life choices, or to say, ain't none of us perfect, except maybe Amnon. The show we're going to be talking about tonight is John Sidney McCain III. There he is at the Naval Academy. There is as a pilot. Then you can see where he was shot down. That's him being rescued in a lake right there in Hanoi. There he is in bed there as an injured pilot. And then you see him as he has come home. So that's some of the stories of John McCain, the pilot involved in the Vietnam War. The next slide is there are many conflicting stories about the son and grandson of U.S. admirals. His father was an admiral. In fact, I believe somewhere around the day he was captured, or right before that his father was named the commandant of the Navy. His grandfather was an admiral. Which are truths and which are lies, we will probably never know. Did he escape on his name and legacy? In other words, when he went to different places, being the son and grandson of an admiral, did he get by just by saying, I'm John McCain III, or just did he actually go out there and earn it? Was he a turbo pilot? We'll go into that quite a bit. Was he responsible for the U.S. Forrestal carrier fire that resulted in deaths of a large amount of Americans? The Forrestal carrier fire put the Forrestal aircraft carrier out of service for 2 years, where they went back in and did repairs and so forth. So what are the truth and lies? We got the facts and opinions. Did he get special treatment as a POW off his name and legacy? Did he collaborate with the communists? Was he a Manchurian Candidate? Now, if you never saw the movie Manchurian Candidate, I highly recommend it. It was Frank Sinatra was in it, and several other actors, and he actually bought the rights to the movie and put it away for years, but it's available now. Did he sell out the MIA and POWs after he came home when there was legislation out there? What's fact and opinion? I don't know the answers myself. I have researched and attempted to present you all sides of the story without politics. This is not got. We're not talking about politics this show or the next show. We're talking about a man who was very prominent in what was going on in our country. And then I'm going to ask you what your thoughts are. There he is as a family man. There is in the right corner is a United States Senator. Bottom left, there he is running for president. And the bottom picture is him probably doing the last thing he did as a United States Senator. He thumbs down to the bill to kill Obamacare. So that was him as a military. That was him as a United States congressman, so forth. So, okay, let's get started. Now, you'll see up in the red the actual where I got this information from, United States Navy's notable graduates. John Sidney McCain III was born in Panama Canal Zone, August 29th, 1936. He attended school in Alexandria, Virginia, and graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1958. In 1973, he graduated from the National War College in Washington, D.C. He was a pilot in the United States Navy from 1958 to 1981. From 1967 to 1973, he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. He received numerous awards, including the Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Purple Heart, Distinguished Flying Cross. There's also an award for being a POW. So that's some of the awards he received. John McCain rebelled at the Naval Academy and as a POW. That's him at the Naval Academy. In a way, John McCain trained in the art of defiance years before his de-winged aircraft cratered into a Hanoi lake. His Vietnamese captors pulled him from the water, stabbed him repeatedly with a bayonet, and crushed his shoulder with a rifle butt. His right knee was twisted at a 90-degree angle. Provided helpful information, they told him, and medical care for his shattered body would be provided. McCain refused and was beaten unconscious. Okay. Now, prison guards were in charge at that moment, and some semblance of the violent cause and effect. McCain's refusal to abide, leading to anguishing torture, would be a recurring feature of his more than 5 years of imprisonment until his release with hundreds of other prisoners in March of 1973. Now, I want to pause here. We're going to be talking the first part of the show. We're going to be talking about all the great things about John McCain. We're going to be talking a little bit about what John McCain has to say about himself, and then we're going to be talking about a later show of the people who were somewhat skeptical of him and his service. So this is all people who thought John McCain was very special. Hopefully he is. The guards in Hanoi were in a long line of disciplinarians who tried and failed to corral McCain for decades, searching from his maverick persona, seemingly at the Naval Academy, to his rebellious streak as a senator against the leader of his party, President Trump. Yet McCain's infamous streak of bucking authority at Annapolis may have prepared him to defy his captors and survive the physically and psychological harsh conditions of confinement at Wallow Prison, better known as the Hanoi Hilton. He was a rebel even there, okay? Saying no to his captors came easily and naturally to John McCain, said Alvin Townley, author of Defiant, A History of the Most Diehard American Prisoners of the Vietnam War. McCain, the worst of an Annapolis bad bunch. Before his captivity, McCain honed the art of insubordination at a place created to pulverize individualism into obedience. I was really rebellious, McCain said of his time as a midshipman in the Naval Academy, class of 1958. I mean, really rebellious. Years later, he said he resented the academy and hazing rituals that honed him and his father. Okay. That's one of the hazing groups going on, as you saw in that picture. His father, John S. McCain Jr., was undersized, scrappy middy who himself earned full marks at the academy before he commanded all forces in Vietnam during his son's captivity. You can see in the picture there's John McCain, his father, and his grandfather. The family's naval patriarch, John S. Slew McCain Sr., was posthumously awarded the rank of full admiral. He died in 1945, 4 days after he witnessed the Japanese surrender aboard the USS Missouri. He also a mediocre midshipman who surpassed fellow graduates who had much higher grades, as if success following a tumultuous period at Annapolis was heredity. John S. McCain III quickly took up that mantle. He developed a reputation for departing and defying authority as he struggled to reconcile how much career in the Navy was by his own design. When you got a legacy like that, it's hard not to go to the academy. There were times in my youth when I harbored a secret resentment that life's course seemed to be preordained. He wrote in his 1999 Memoir of Faith of Our Fathers. Sarcastically, yet iron-willed, McCain wrote in his 1999 book that he scaled the academy's walls, a serious infraction, countless times to drink and flirt with women in town. A group of rabble-rousers, middies, the bad bunch, blessed around McCain. To be around McCain away from school grounds, one classmate said, was like being in a train wreck. Biographer Robert Tinberg wrote in John McCain, An American Odyssey. That's what he had to say, okay? The pseudonymous Captain Ben Hart, described in McCain's memoir as the bull-necked Marine company officer who oversaw him, was obsessed with catching McCain in the act of serious infractions. He resorted to stiff punishment for minor offenses. McCain wrote in an effort to drum him out of the academy with piecemeal violations. Demerits piled up faster than the homework assignments. McCain often ignored. Marks on the record are given to midshipmen for everything from substandard appearance to arriving late to formation. McCain was among a few proud members of the Central Club. Middies who earned more than 100 demerits in a year. And McCain constantly tap danced on the line between perpetual misconduct and expulsion. And they even had their own patch, the Central Club, United States Military Academy. 100 demerits, okay. In one escapade, Hart approached a contraband TV hidden in a crawl space and circulated among the middies. He wrote up McCain for the infraction, 30 demerits, almost certain to send McCain home. A game similar to rock, paper, scissors was played to see which media would take the fall for McCain. A well-behaved comrade absorbed the demerits and the TV, McCain wrote. In other words, they knew it was going to kick him out, so someone else stood up and said, I did it. McCain's unrelenting behavior earned the derision of his superiors, but the respect of his classmates. In one notable incident during his sophomore year, McCain saw a senior dress down a Filipino steward as if he were a first-year plebe. McCain forcefully stood up to the senior in the cafeteria, a serious public breach of academic hierarchy. The senior backed down and left. His roommate, Frank Gamboa, said McCain was the only one in the company who would have stood up for the steward. Give me a couple of weeks to think about it, and I might have been that brave, Gamboa said of the incident. McCain successfully outfoxed Hart and graduated in 1958. Only 5 other midshipmen out of 899 ranked lower. They are graduating. 9 years later, after he nearly drowned in a Trubach Lake, McCain would finally be ahead of his colleagues. No American prisoner arrived at Hanoi Hilton in worse condition than he. John Hubble wrote in the book POW. Okay. Next, all right. He smashed his knee, ballooned to the size of a football, and was the same shade of brown, and multiple limbs were mangled. Blood pooled in his knee, provoking a serious a fear of sepsis. His captors demanded intelligence exchange for medical care. You can see him there being cared for. Chances are that's not really a doctor, but somebody there from the prison. McCain refused, and for days he languished in and out of consciousness before he decided to buy time by giving them information. But it was too late, and his state too grave to help him. His captor said he was left for dead until one of the men discovered that McCain was the son of an admiral, Timberg wrote. In other words, the North Vietnamese captors decided he was in too bad a shape to worry about taking care of, but then they found out his daddy was an admiral, so all of a sudden he wasn't as bad a shape as they thought he was. The propaganda value of releasing a prominent captive was attractive to the Vietnamese, who went to lengths to portray their treatment as humane. But McCain was adamantly opposed to early release, spewing expletives at his captors, who beat him in response. Timberg wrote, he adhered to the code of conduct. Only leave the prison together or in order of capture. Do not accept early release. The North Vietnamese had removed 11 particularly unruly captives from the Hanoi Hilton and isolated them in a prison they dubbed Alcatraz. At that North Vietnamese Ministry of National Defense, Townley told the Washington Post, that group included a full Medal of Honor recipients James B. Stockdale, who was going to be put on television talking to Jane Fonda, and he took a stool and beat himself in the face so much they couldn't put him on the air, who led the men alongside the fellow captors Jeremiah Denton. Jeremiah Denton, you may recognize as being a United States Senator. You also may recognize that when he was shown on TV, he, with his eyes, flickering his eyes, he spelled out torture and so forth. So that was Jeremiah Denton, who was the American leader with their crafted mission to return with honor. The one thing that the Hanoi Hilton had was they had a chain command developed by these men, and that's what got a lot of them through, where the enlisted men out in the jungle cages and so forth did not necessarily have the chain of command. Included an edit that unity and resistance were expected of the men. They were dragged from the Hanoi Hilton and shackled at Alcatraz in late October 1967, just before an anti-aircraft missile brought down McCain's aircraft. The Alcatraz gang was gone, but the code to divide the Vietnamese captors lingered in the decrepit cells of Hanoi prison. John McCain put these edicts on like armor, Townley said. It became routine for McCain. No to early release, no to special treatment. Defiance incensed the guards, who met his refusal with more beatings, fighting back, even as an exercise in impotence. Not a lot up for McCain. It got him through the night, kept him sane, helped him maintain his self-respect, Timberg wrote. Okay, next slide. But the guards found an instrument to finally bend McCain, the ropes. The guard cinched McCain's shattered arms behind his back for hours at a time, arriving on a schedule to tighten them. His limbs cracked and popped under the favored methods of extracting bogus confirmations of war crimes. Nobody beat the ropes, Townley said. McCain signed a statement calling himself an air pirate. After that, McCain tried to hang himself with his shirt before a guard intervened. As you can see there, pictures by McGrath, who was a POW, some of the pictures of the torture with the arms tied behind and so forth. So next slide, please. So we got a little controversy right there. We're saying that he hung out and didn't do it, and now all of a sudden he did do it. Many POWs feel a distinct shame in surrendering or breaking while in captivity, said Hampton Sides, author of Ghost Soldier, a chronicle of the mission to rescue prisoners who survived the Bataan Death March in World War II, which is another thing that was somewhat different. People who looked at the prisoners of war in World War II looked at them a little bit different than they looked at the Vietnam War. In fact, I think the POWs in Vietnam War were more of a hero status than the people who actually fighting the war who were not unfortunate enough to get captured. It's deeply embedded in human DNA and perhaps more in American DNA that you don't surrender, he told the Post. Survival and defiance and the link between them seemed intuitive for McCain. In one instance, as spring of 1968 approached, visiting North Vietnamese dignitaries toured the prison grounds and encountered McCain. His language was so forcibly obscene, it repulsed and blew them away from the prison like tumbleweeds. McCain yelled that he would reject early release and amnesty. It earned McCain solitary confinement for 2 years. You can't imagine the example John set for the rest of the camp by doing that, former prisoner Jack Van Loan told Timberg. That is McCain's flight suit. Would you go back down on the other slide? That hanging in that right now is in the prison of Hanoi prison in Vietnam. There, I've seen it hanging there. It's one of the few things that are in the prison about Americans. That's his flight suit, his helmet, boots, and his parachute that's on display there. Okay. In 1973, in a moment that marked the end of the Vietnam War for many, 591 prisoners were released as part of Operation Homecoming. Despite his captor's offers of early release, McCain remained a prisoner until then. To return with honor, the prisoner edict said, "You must return together." It was perhaps one of the few moments when John S. McCain followed the rules. Okay, next slide. John McCain's naval career before becoming a POW. I'm also having a hard time tonight. Controversy was surrounded a series of crashes involving a plane piloted by John McCain while serving the U.S. Navy. In his autobiography, he maintained that a couple of the accidents were caused by engine failure. But an official investigation by the Naval Aviation Safety Center makes clear that the first accident in March of 1960 was caused exclusively by pilot error. The facts. During the course of his flying career with the United States Navy, John McCain was involved in at least 5 major mishaps or crashes involving his plane. The most dramatic incident occurred in 1967. He barely escaped with his life after a missile exploded aboard an aircraft carrier, the USS Forrestal, in July that year, killing 134 of his fellow crew members. In October, McCain was shot down over Vietnam by a surface-to-air missile from his new ship. Navy records of an investigation that found McCain's first crash was due to pilot error and not, as McCain had stated, an engine failure. The LA Times also pinpointed the dates of early incidents that more closely, and we have rewritten here and reordered some sections to reflect this new information. The 1967 Forrestal disaster's official documents, which differ from McCain's own, widely accept recollection. We have also included McCain's admission of daredevil clowning in an accident that did not result in loss of plane. We have had numerous questions about this widely circulated claim. Some say McCain lost 5 planes, others that he crashed 5 planes, and offer this alleged fact as evidence that he was a bad pilot. All are incorrect. McCain did lose 2 Navy aircraft while piloting them. One crash was found to be McCain's fault. The other due to an engine failure of undetermined causes. A third was destroyed on the deck of the carrier USS Forrestal when a missile fired accidentally from another plane hit either the plane next to McCain's or less likely his own aircraft, triggering a disastrous fire that killed 134 sailors and nearly killed McCain. A 4th plane was lost when he was shot down over North Vietnam on a bombing mission over Hanoi. Okay, the alleged 5th crash turns out to be a misinterpretation of a flight accident that did not result in the loss of the aircraft. McCain admitted to causing that accident or incident through daredevil clowning, but returned safely. Okay. None of these incidents prevented McCain from winning regular promotions and being assigned additional flight duty. The Navy praised his aggressiveness and skillful airmanship when awarding him the Navy Commendation Medal for an attack on October 18, 1967, on a shipyard in Haiphong, North Vietnam, prior to his capture. The Navy also commended his superb airmanship in awarding him the Distinguished Flying Cross for a bomb attack on Hanoi, a power plant, October 26, 1967. His plane was hit by a surface-to-air missile on that mission, but he continued his bomb delivery pass and released his bombs over the target before being forced to eject, according to the official citation. Okay. Let's go back and talk about his crashes. His first crash was March 12, 1960. This took place while McCain, a young, unmarried officer not long out of the Naval Academy, was in advanced flight training at Corpus Christi, Texas. Timberg and McCain both gave the cause as engine failure. Remember, Timberg is the one who was writing the story. But a Navy investigation proclaimed McCain's inattention to altitude. This is what McCain had to say. I crashed a plane in Corpus Christi Bay on Saturday morning. The engine quit while I was practicing landings. I barely managed to get the canopy open and swim to the surface. I took a few painkillers and hit the sack to rest my aching back for a few hours. Then I was out carousing, injured back and all, later that evening. Timberg's account agrees, but Navy records do not. According to the Naval Aviation Safety Center report obtained by the Los Angeles Times, investigators determined that the engine did not quit and McCain was to blame. Okay. He was coming back from a football game. According to the Naval Aviation Safety Center report obtained by the Los Angeles Times, investigators determined that the engine did not quit and McCain was to blame. Los Angeles Times reported cockpit instruments that froze on impact showed the engine was still producing power. When water quenched the exhaust stack, it preserved a bright blue color, showing that the engine was still hot. That's the way the plane looked. That was one of the planes. Investigators determined that McCain was watching instruments in his cockpit that indicated the position of his landing gear and had lost track of his altitude and speed. The report concluded, in the opinion of the board, the pilot's preoccupation in the cockpit, coupled with the use of power setting too low to maintain a level flight in a turn, were the primary cause of this accident. So that was the cause of the first one. Then clowning in Spain. About December 1961, those who claim McCain lost the plane when they bothered to give specific citations at all point to an incident described by McCain as happening on one of McCain's deployments to the Mediterranean. The LA Times put the date of this incident as around December 1961, while McCain was on a training mission flying from the USS Intrepid. Flying low over the Iberian Peninsula, he took out some power lines, which led to a spate of newspaper storage in which he was predictably identified as the son of an admiral. The tale has gotten better with age. These days, they talk about the day McCain turned the lights out in Spain. McCain described it this way, in Faith of My Fathers. There were occasional setbacks in my efforts to round out my Navy profile. Next slide. My reputation was certainly not enhanced when I knocked down some power lines while flying too low over southern Spain. My daredevil clowning had cut off electricity to a great many Spanish homes and created a small international incident. The LA Times, which interviewed others who were in McCain's squadron at the time, reports that he returned to the carrier with 10 feet of power line trailing from his plane and with a severed oil line. But while McCain himself admits that this incident was caused by his own daredevil clowning, he landed safely and did not lose the aircraft. McCain's detractors should scratch that crash off their list. Despite the incident in Spain and the early findings that McCain was to blame for the Corpus Christi crash, McCain was promoted to full lieutenant on June 1st, 1962. Okay, next. The second crash, November 28, 1965. By this time, Lieutenant McCain was stationed at Meridian, Mississippi, and was newly married to his first wife, Carol. McCain had flown to Philadelphia to attend an Army-Navy football game with his parents and was bringing back Christmas presents for the family in the baggage compartment of his plane. His jet engine quit over the Chesapeake Bay. McCain, 1999. Somewhere between the eastern shores of Maryland and Norfolk, Virginia, as I was preparing to come in and refuel, my engine flamed out and I had to eject at 1,000 feet. The Christmas gifts were lost with my airplane. He had just begun his descent over unpopulated tidal terrain when the engine died. I've got to fly him out, he radioed. He went through the standard relight procedures 3 times. At 1,000 feet, he ejected, landed on the deserted beach moments before the plane slammed into a clump of trees. The Navy classified it as a routine ejection. The LA Times obtained records of the investigation of this crash, giving a somewhat different picture, but ultimately blaming engine failure. Los Angeles Times says, in a report dated January 18, 1966, the Naval Aviation Safety Center said it could not determine the cause of the accident or corroborate McCain's account of an explosion in the engine. A close examination of the engine found no discrepancies which would have caused or contributed to engine failure or malfunction. About 2 weeks after issuing its report, the Safety Center revised its findings and said the accident resulted from the failure of malfunction of an undetermined component of the engine. A little more than a year later, McCain was promoted to lieutenant commander on January 1st, 1967. The Forrestal disaster, July 20, 1967. That is the Forrestal there. At the time of this incident, Lieutenant Commander McCain had already flown several bombing missions over North Vietnam from the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal, as he was in his A-4 Skyhawk, loaded with 2 1,000-pound bombs and waiting on the carrier deck for his turn to launch. A Zuni missile, accidentally fired from another aircraft, swooshed across the carrier deck and struck either McCain's plane or the one next to it. Okay. That triggered a fire and a series of bombs and missiles explosions that killed 134 sailors. McCain himself barely escaped alive. He quickly leaped from his plane into the pool of burning jet fuel that immediately surrounded him. About 90 seconds later, he was blown 15 feet back when the first bomb cooked off and exploded, killing several nearby firefighters. And you can see the pictures there of some of the fires going on. Okay. James M. Kaela, I hope I'm getting his name somewhat close, has written a scholarly article about the disaster, which appeared in the fall 2003 issue of Foundation magazine, a publication of the National Naval Aviation Museum, located in Pensacola, Florida. Kaela, who is now associated editor of Proceedings in Naval History magazines published by the United States Naval Institute in Annapolis, generously shared with us copies of some key documents which he obtained from the Navy under the Freedom of Information Act. They included a typed transcript of the sworn testimony that McCain gave less than 2 weeks after the disaster of August 5th, 1967, and a written statement. This is McCain's 1967 statement. I heard a loud explosion and immediately fire all around the plane. Smoke and flame were around the cockpit, so I unstrapped and unplugged my oxygen hose, keeping my visor down. Next slide. I looked to the aft of the airplane and saw nothing but flame, and I could see burning fuel in front and around the airplane. Would not look too bad to the forward. I opened the canopy and walked out on the refueling probe and jumped from the end of it, landing just on the edge of the fire and roll clear. As you can see, the burning planes there. McCain said he rushed to help another pilot who had gotten out of his plane and had jumped into the flames and rolled clear, but was still on fire. Okay. McCain 1967 statement. I started running over towards him, and I was with a group of men with fire hoses. I was about 10 feet from him. The first bomb exploded and blew me back 15 feet. I sat up and saw a lot of bodies near me. Someone who had been some who had been on the hose, and I ran and jumped over the starboard catwalk under the flight deck. That first bomb exploded was 90 seconds into the fire. Soon it ignited other bombs and other missiles. Later on the hangar deck below the main flight deck, McCain said he and another officer, along with a lot of fine enlisted men, pushed several bomb carts overboard to keep them away from flaming fuel that was curling down from above. He later noticed that I had a hole below my left knee with some metal in it and two small shrapnel cuts in my thigh and shoulder. Okay? The Forester was badly damaged and put out of action for 2 years. And more than a month after the disaster, McCain was flying missions from another carrier, the USS Oriskany. Whose plane? That's been a question for quite some time. McCain has said for years that the missile struck his own plane, and this has been widely accepted. But official documents don't support that. We now judge it more likely that the missile first struck a plane next to McCain's, and that his own memory of the event has changed in the years since. In his 1999 book, Faith of My Fathers, McCain writes, I took my helmet back and shut the plane's canopy. In the next instant, a Zuni missile struck the belly fuel tank of my plane, tearing it open, igniting 200 gallons of fuel that spilled into the deck and knocking two of my bombs to the deck. Next slide. An account by James Coella, however, comes to a different conclusion, writing in 2003. Coella points out correctly that the official Navy investigation into the disaster, the Manual of Judge Advocate General, a basic final investigation report concerning the fire on board the USS Forrestal, included that the missile struck plane near number 405, a A4 piloted by Lieutenant Commander Fred White, who was among those killed in the incident. McCain's plane was number 416. As you can see there from the illustration, 405 was to the left, McCain's was 416. Some people said that the missile came from McCain's plane, but obviously it came from, it looks like 110. Rear Admiral Forsyth Massey, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet, headed the Navy's post-disaster investigation and wrote in a summary that he sent up to the chain of command on September 19, 1967. Next slide. Rear Admiral Forsyth Massey, Commanding-in-Chief of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet, headed the U.S. Navy's post-disastrous investigation and wrote in a summary he sent up the chain of command in September 1967. Just repeated that twice, just make sure you got it. Rear Admiral Massey, September 19, 1967, says, a review of the voluminous material contained in the report of investigation established the central fact that a Zuni rocket was inadvertently fired from a F-4 aircraft, number 110, and struck the external fuel tank of A-4 aircraft number 405, which was clustered in a pack along with other aircraft on the deck of the U.S. Forrestal. This inadvertent firing of the rocket resulted in a raging fire. Massey makes no reference to McCain's plane number 416. Another summary written by the Navy's Judge Advocate General as he forwarded the report to the Chief of Naval Operations all said the missile struck A-4 405 and set off the fire. Okay. That summary also says a fragment punctured the centerline external fuel tank of another A-4 just aft of the jet blast effector off catapult number 3. That second plane isn't identified specifically, but McCain's plane was fifth in line behind the catapults. Coella says he believes it was plane 310. He also notes that immediately after the disaster, when McCain's recollection was still fresh, he was by no means certain whose plane had been hit. He said in his typed statement, I was just ready to commence the airline trim check when I heard a loud explosion and immediately fire all around the airplane. At first, I thought Lieutenant Commander White's airplane had exploded or the explosion had occurred beneath my starboard wing due to the proximity of the explosion. I now think it might have been one aircraft further out, but I'm not sure. That was his statement. Okay. McCain also expressed considerable uncertainty when investigators questioned him on August 5th, 1967, just a week after the fire. Question, do you think in your own mind at this point that something had hit your airplane or not? McCain says, yes, sir. The reason, looking back on it, I think I felt I would like to add about my testimony after seeing the bomb go off and the injuries involved. I was a little bit emotionally upset, and some of the things that I may remember, I may not remember exactly. But when I saw Lieutenant Commander Hope on the hangar deck, and I believe you can ask him about this, the first thing I said to him was, Herb, I thought I had killed you. So I must have believed that it was from my aircraft at the time. Then I heard so many other stories as to what happened. I didn't believe it was my aircraft. But at the time, I think I believed that it was my aircraft or the one right next to me or next to it. Okay, next slide. We can't resolve with perfect certainty which version is correct. Film the disaster taken by the Navy camera cannot decide the matter because it was pointed away from the point of impact at the time the missile fired. By that time, the camera swung quickly abaft. Both McCain and White's planes were enveloped in the spreading flames. A narrated version has been posted on YouTube, so you can go to YouTube and see it. Much physical evidence was, of course, destroyed by the series of bomb explosions that began 90 seconds after the first impact. It is possible that the missile hit White's plane and then fragments of it also hit McCain's. We judge that the missile most likely hit White's plane and not McCain's. We base this on the unequivocal finding of the official investigation and the uncertainty that McCain expressed just a week after the event. Next slide. In his memory, 32 years later, at the time he published the book, we consider it less reliable. In fact, his 1999 version departs from the official report in other respects as well. He writes in his book that his plane carried 200 gallons of fuel, but the official report says the A-4s carried 400 gallons. McCain writes that 2 of my bombs were knocked to the deck, but the Judge Advocate General's summary mentioned only 1 bomb, a 1,000-pounder, that fell onto the deck from A445, White's plane. McCain doesn't mention bombs falling from his own plane in the testimony and statement he gave immediately after the disaster. Okay, next slide. No wet start. This is where some of the rumors came in. A special note is in order here. We have seen some baseless claims that McCain was somehow responsible for the Forrestal disaster. One incorrect but widely quoted theory has him triggering the Zuni missile with the exhaust of his own plane by wet starting, deliberately dumping fuel into the afterburner before starting in order to shoot a large flame from the tail of the aircraft. This is a preposterous notion. For one thing, A-4 jets flew at subsonic speeds and were not equipped with afterburners. According to the Military Analysis Network site maintained by the Federation of American Scientists, the A-4 was powered by a single Pratt & Whitney J52P408A non-afterburning turbojet engine. The manufacturer's description of the aircraft also describes the power plant as one 11,187-pound thrust Pratt & Whitney engine with no mention of an afterburner. Next slide. And while pilots tell us that a wet start is possible, even without an afterburner, the theory fails for another reason. The tail of McCain's plane was pointed over the side of the carrier and away from other planes at the time. The F-4 Phantom fighter that fired the missile was facing McCain's plane from the opposite side of the deck, as shown as Kayla's design diagram, and other diagrams in Navy film of the fire. Thus, bogus theory appears to have gotten its start from a report by New York Times reporter R.W. Apple Jr., who reported on July 31st, 1967, 2 days after the fire, that the Forrestal's captain, John K. Belling, believed an extreme wet start had created a thick tongue of flame that set off the Zuni. Okay. Belling did not identify McCain's plane as the source. However, instead, only the aircraft was parked near the carrier's island, which would have put it far forward and on the opposite side of the flight deck from where McCain's plane was getting ready to launch. Not usually noted by the conspiracy theorists is that Captain Belling repeatedly said that he had been unable to fully sort out the conflicting reports that circulated on the 5,000-man vessel in the hours after the fire. According to Apple, who also called the wet start theory tentative. In any case, Belling's early theory was soon dismissed by Navy investigators who found that the Zuni had been touched off by a stray electrical charge and not by a jet exhaust. Next slide. The investigation revealed that the rocket fired because of a freak surge of electricity jumped through the plane's system at the moment the pilot switched from outside electrical generator to the plane's internal power system. And as Cabela also notes in his account, the investigation found that in the wartime pressure to get planes launched quickly, crews had not observed two key safety precautions that could have prevented the stray spike of electricity from firing the rocket. The pigtail that connects the plane's wiring to the missile had been plugged into prematurely before the plane was on the catapult, and a safety pin that also would have prevented the firing had also been removed, Callow says. There is no possible way John McCain could have caused the fire on board the Forrestal. McCain's only connection with the investigation was as a witness in both a written deposition shortly after the fire and later in sworn testimony to the board. Next slide. McCain subsequently transferred to the aircraft carrier USS Orensky. He took off from the Orensky on the day he was downed by a surface-to-air missile fired by the North Vietnamese. I still remember joining other aviators as we escaped our aircraft, jumping to the burning flight deck below and rolling through the burning jet fuel to avoid the heat and fire, McCain said Friday in a written statement marking the 50th anniversary of the Forrestal tragedy. While some of us were unfortunate to make it out of the fire, many of the ship's crew and came charging and poised to fight back. McCain recalled the awesome courage on display that day during the nearly 18-hour battle against the blaze. By honoring those who perished during catastrophes such as these, we began to understand the true cost of war, McCain said in a statement. Okay? The profession of arms is inherently dangerous. Driving warships across oceans to foreign shores is dangerous. The coordinated ballet of Navy aviation flight operation is dangerous. But the cost of not engaging in these operations is overwhelmingly greater. That was a statement by McCain. On October 26, McCain would fly his 23rd run over North Vietnam, joining a 20-plane mission to bomb a power plant in the capital city, Hanoi, which had been off limits to U.S. attacks. An officer warned McCain to be careful, that some of the pilots might not return. Don't worry about me, McCain said. Hanoi was well defended against air attacks. As McCain approached his target, Russian-made surface-to-air missiles the size of telephone poles, you can see one there in the picture, or actually a couple there in the picture, filled the sky. Suddenly, his instrument panel lit up. A missile had locked on his plane. Next slide. McCain dropped his bombs and began to pull up. Then a missile sheared off his right wing, sending his plane spinning towards Earth, out of control. Shot down. The fourth plane McCain lost was, of course, the Skyhawk, shot down over North Vietnam on October 26, 1967. The previously mentioned official citations describe 15 enemy surface-to-air missiles fired at the attacking U.S. planes and extremely heavy and accurate anti-aircraft fire. Far from blaming McCain for the loss of his plane, the Navy awarded him, in addition to the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Silver Star for his conspicuous gallantry while imprisoned by the North Vietnamese for nearly 5.5 years that followed. Shortly after his release, he was promoted again to full commander. Next slide. There he is being rescued at the lake. He went in and sunk right on down, and we'll get into how he got saved. But there he is, they're bringing him up at the lake. There's a memorial there at the lake now in Hanoi. His name is misspelled, but there's a commemorating him there. On October 26, 1967, Ma Van On ran from the safety of a bomb shelter at the height of an air raid and swam out into the lake where Lieutenant Commander McCain was drowning. Tangled his parachute cord after ejecting when his Skyhawk bomber was hit by a missile. In an extraordinary act of compassion at a time when Vietnamese citizens were being killed by U.S. aerial bombardments, he pulled a barely conscious McCain to the lake surface and, with the help of a neighbor, dragged him towards the shore. And when a furious mob at the water's edge began to beat and stab the captured pilot, Mr. On drove them back. They didn't like the idea of the American pilots that were bombing their city. Next slide, please. Claimed to have saved McCain's life has been somewhat of a cottage industry in Hanoi. There have been a lot of preposterous claims, but the neighbors around the lake said that was exactly how it happened. Their story is also confirmed by the Vietnamese government. McCain, as a senator closely involved in rebuilding U.S.-Vietnam relations, visited Hanoi in 1996, and a meeting was arranged with Mr. An. Mr. An was a wiry little guy. You saw him in the last picture. He looked as if he had only ever shaved once or twice, and he had his own uniform on, which is strange since I thought he was a civilian. But he raced up to McCain and kept repeating his name as he embraced him. Then, through an interpreter, Mr. An recounted the events of that day as McCain listened. He launched into a very emotional description. Suddenly, they saw this parachute coming down into the small lake. Okay. Everybody was afraid because they knew it was an American pilot and didn't know what to do. He said he just instinctively grabbed this big bamboo log and threw it into the water and jumped in after it. One of his neighbors joined him, and two of them swam out to the parachute. Apparently, McCain had broken both arms and one leg and had sunk to the bottom, but it pulled him out of the lake. When they got to the bank, a couple of men attacked McCain, breaking his shoulder with a rifle butt and stabbing him in the leg before Mr. An stopped them. Next slide. That day, he saved McCain from drowning and then from being killed by the mob. McCain listened, but there was no dramatic response. He just nodded and said, "Thank you very much," and gave Mr. An a little Senate seal. And that's what it looked like. Mr. An, today he died, treated as if it were a Congressional Medal of Honor. Next slide, if there is one. Oh, yes. Senator John McCain was tortured and held captive for 5 years, 5.5 years as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, an experience that shaped the rest of his life. In Hanoi, McCain is etched in the city's history with a memorial at the lake where his plane crashed and at the prison, now a museum where he was held captive. McCain's plane was shot down during a bombing run over North Vietnam in 1967, and he parachuted into the lake in what is now a busy part of Hanoi. Already badly injured, he was beaten and taken to a nearby prison called Wallow, which is U.S. POW's nickname is the Hanoi Hilton. He refused medical treatment and beaten with a bayonet. Okay. That is Hanoi prison. That's the original. But a lot of that now is a condo. This is the entrance, the way it looks now. And again, there's McCain's flight suit and so forth. While holding him as a prisoner of war, North Vietnamese tried to exploit the fact that his father was a prominent admiral at the time. They offered McCain an early release, but he refused, adhering to the military code of first in, first out. Next slide. McCain was finally freed after 5.5 years, 2 of which he spent in solitary confinement. He leapt off the plane to return him to the United States, gripping a handrail with hair that had turned white, according to the New York Times report from 1973 on his release. The injuries he sustained would affect his mobility for the rest of his life. At Truc Bach Lake, which is situated in the middle of modern-day Hanoi, there is a memorial that bears McCain's name. He told C-SPAN in 1992 he never understood why the monument is there, why they erected it, and the significance it has to them. "I have never figured it out," he laughed. Next slide. McCain, then a Navy lieutenant commander, was by all accounts what the American prisoners call a tough resistor. He was nicknamed Crip for the severity of his injury he sustained, a shoulder, both arms, and his knee broken with a bayonet wound near the groin. When his fighter plane was shot down in October 1967, military rules only allowed POWs to go home in the order of their capture. But some senior officers said his medical condition justified accepting an officer a release from the North Vietnamese. McCain, the son of a prominent admiral, did not want to be part of North Vietnamese propaganda, so he chose to endure years of torture instead. At times, McCain seemed to court punishment, noisily cussing out his captors while giving thumbs up signs to his fellow prisoners. No matter what he did, he always played to the bleachers. Robert Coran, a military historian, wrote in a book about the camps. One more slide now. All of the prisoners acknowledged that everyone had a breaking point. McCain came 10 months after he arrived with his father taking command of the Pacific Fleet. The North Vietnamese were determined to coerce their son into denouncing the war. For 4 days, they tried him with ropes, beat him every few hours, rebroke his arm and left him in a pool of his own blood and refused. Finally, he signed a tape recorded a war crimes confession. His fellow prisoners say his capitulation only redoubled his determination to provoke his captors. Act of defiances felt so good that I have felt that more than compensated for their repercussions. He had aroused, wrote, and they helped me keep at bay the unsettled feeling of gut and self-doubt, my confession. We've run out of time tonight. We will take up on our next show when this, right where we started out. Our next show is, and I normally have it prepared and have this down, we're going to be going into June. I can't hardly imagine we're already into June of 2020 or coming up to it. Hopefully we're going to be able to get out and get out of our prisons and so forth. The next show will be June 10th. We will continue and we'll be talking about what John McCain, his own story of what he wrote about being a POW. Again, there's some interesting things pointed out in this first part of people who were speaking for John McCain. We're going to be going on that and on his side of the story, and then we'll go to the next, the other side. But start trying to decide what you think. Throw the politics out. Just go with the information that we're getting and see what you think about John McCain. As I said before, nobody's perfect. Well, none of us wants people to come back and look at our past too strongly. Thank you for tuning in. Tell all your friends about our show. Amnon, thank you for your part at your play at the studio. I'm at home here doing the show. You have a great week. Take care of yourself and watch out for that virus. Thank you and good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.